Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Kaylin Mock with the Montana Office of Rural Health and Area Health Education Center, and I will be hosting today's Rural Health Initiative webinar. The mission of the RHI is to engage partners to share ideas and expertise and to support communities in improving health while stimulating a higher level of wellness across the state. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today for our webinar, Elder Abuse Awareness and Reporting in Montana. This webinar is being presented by Denise Armstrong, the Executive Director at Big Sky Senior Services in Billings, Montana. And this webinar is in partnership with the Montana Geriatric Education Center and Riverstone Health. So a few technical details before we get started. All lines have been set to mute. At the end of the presentation, we will have a question and answer session. And at this time, I will unmute all of the lines. If you wish to mute your line during the Q&A, you can do so by selecting the microphone icon in the WebEx control panel that you'll see on your screen. Also, pressing mute on your phone will work as well. You can also submit questions in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen during the duration of the presentation, and they will be addressed at the end during the Q&A session with Denise. If you type in the chat box, though, please make sure you are sending your comments to all participants. Otherwise, the comments will only be seen by me. One last thing, once the webinar is over, you all will have the opportunity to provide valuable feedback for RHI through a brief survey. The survey will automatically pop up on your screen and will just take a few minutes to complete, and we greatly appreciate your feedback. So that covers the technical details, and thank you all again for joining us today. I will go ahead and roll the ball over to Denise, and she will begin the presentation.
Hello to everybody, and welcome. It's truly an honor to be presenting to you today for a number of reasons. Primarily because June is Elder Abuse Awareness Month. And just as the name indicates, elder abuse awareness is just not here in Montana or just in America. It is a global problem, and it's growing due to the growth in our elderly population and the fact that we're all living longer than we used to live. It's my hopes that this WebEx will help to raise awareness of elder abuse, leading to prevention if possible. So thank you all for participating in the event today. So here's a little outline of what we'll be covering, who and what we do here at Big Sky Senior Services, what's going on as far as the demographics in the state of Montana. I'll run you through some definitions of elder abuse, help you understand what's really driving these elder abuse issues as far as the demographics of the individuals involved, and also help you with some ideas for intervention and reporting of elder abuse. So Big Sky Senior Services, we're a local nonprofit. We're based in Billings, Montana. We've been around since 1977, and we're helping about 250 local senior citizens and vulnerable adults stay living in their homes through a variety of programs. The Prevention of Elder Abuse program is the reason why I'm presenting today. It's been around since 1990, and it primarily started as the first national chapter for the prevention of elder abuse in the U.S. And originally it was designed just to create awareness. We had created a training program for financial employees, as well as a gatekeeper training to help create awareness of elder abuse issues. So let's segue into what is elder abuse. Well, similar to where child abuse was probably 20 years ago, is where we find elder abuse right now, is that people aren't aware that it's truly a problem in our nation, and it's coming across in all different forms: physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation, which I will be going into a little bit deeper in just a few minutes. Throughout this WebEx, I'm going to be sharing some tips and some websites for you to visit on your own and to pass on this information that you're learning today. The first one is through the National Center on Elder Abuse. and it's ncea.org. And this information here is available for anyone to print out and distribute at will. And I think it describes the various types of abuse very clearly and what to look for in those abuse cases. So let's go to Montana. So according to Montana law, elder abuse is defined as the infliction of physical or mental injury or any kind of deprivation of services necessary to maintain physical or mental health of an older person, and I want to point out with this, or persons with developmental disability. In the state of Montana, elderly people are described as anyone over the age of 60 years, and a vulnerable adult or person with disabilities, anybody 18 years or older. So those two groups are protected under the Montana elder abuse law. I might also help you to understand, too, that if it involves financial exploitation, there's kind of a breakdown in our law because financial exploitation starts covering for that. It starts at age 65. And we hope to get that taken care of at the next legislative session. So what's happening in the state of Montana? Why is this such a growing problem for us? Well, can you imagine that over the next 18 years, there are going to be close to 10,000 Montanans turning age 65. Take that a level deeper. There's 56 counties in the state. 34 expect that 30% of their total population will be over the age of 64. And I'm going to show you a map on that condition in just a second. Can you imagine this? 175 centenarians. And they are just, the ones that I've got to meet at a conference I attended were just as brilliant and bright as you would expect for somebody in their 80s to be. And that number will continue to grow. But more importantly, it's projected that by 2020, Montana is going to rank third in the nation per capita for the number of individuals over the age of 60. This creates a feeding frenzy for scam artists and people who are making a living at taking advantage of our elderly people. So this map projects where the biggest percentage increase is going to fall in the state of Montana. The darker the blue, the higher percent increase. And you can see it follows mainly along the western part of the state where we have a lot of people retiring and moving to the Flathead County, Lewis and Clark especially, Ravalli, and even so far down in Beaverhead, Madison, and Yellowstone. So if you're representing one of those counties, I again appreciate the fact that you're taking a special interest in this topic today. So the question is, what creates a risk factor for these vulnerable adults? Well, there's a lot of things that feeds into it, course, age, and gender. If we take a look at especially the population of people 80 years old and older, women are living longer. And in this age group, most of the primary caregivers were the husbands. And women just tend to fall into being more vulnerable than men. Their resources, their finances. I'm going to show you a slide in just a couple of minutes. But when seniors reach an age of retirement, the fear sets in about, boy, am I going to have enough to make ends meet? And this makes them more vulnerable to the scams and to all the sweepstakes coming through the mail, hoping they can somehow double their resources. Social isolation. We have many seniors that are proud and take pride in the fact they're living in their homes for as long as possible. But it also puts them at risk because they're not aware of the resources that are available out there in the community when they need the help. And also, they're not communicating with other individuals to say, boy, I got this piece of mail. Do you think it's legitimate? Also, the fact that they're dependent and they're frail, causing their dependence on putting a lot of dependence on caregivers, family members, things like that, people that they have trusted their whole life that may have turned on them. And of course, any kind of mental or physical impairment will also have an impact on that. But here's a slide that shows that as of 2014, and the percentages are probably the same, 1 in 5 Montana residents receive Social Security. 68% of them are retired. receiving an average of about $1,184 a month on Social Security. And as you can see in that fourth bullet, 1 in 3 older Montana residents rely on Social Security as their only form of income. And again, many of them did not save, were not able to save, and maybe at the time when they were working, living paycheck to paycheck. And so living off an average of $1,200 a month is just probably pretty hard for any of us to fathom. So why aren't the elder abuse reports getting reported? Well, one is fear. Fear that if they report that they are being abused, that maybe if it's the caregiver that's abusing them, they'll lose that caregiver. They also have fear that if it is a family member, which in many cases it is a family member, that the family member may be arrested, and they certainly don't want that to happen. Again, the social isolation, they just don't know where to report. They don't have the ability to report. And of course, again, going back to the family, they blame themselves, saying, you know, this is my grandchild, and I must have done something in raising my children, or my grandchild has this disability. And in most cases, there's usually drugs, alcohol, some kind of gambling addictions that are feeding into the exploitation of the elderly. Let's look at statistics in the state. So in 2016, there were actually 6,925 cases of elder abuse reported to Adult Protective Services. And I'll be going into what Adult Protective Services does a little bit later on in the slide. They're just like Child Protective Services, but they help the adults 60 plus. But what's interesting to this slide is you can see the biggest percentage of abuse cases fell in the form of neglect. And that has two specific categories, caregiver neglect and self-neglect. What's really sad about this statistic is that only 1 in 5 cases is actually reported. Now, this is not just in Montana, this is nationwide. Only 1 in 5 cases are reported. And this goes back to the previous slides, that the people that are being abused don't know where to go to, they're afraid to report, they might lose their caregiver, or in worst case scenarios, they're afraid they're going to end up in a nursing home, which for some seniors, that can be their worst fear based on events that they probably experienced in their younger ages. Let's go into what the different types of abuse that are currently happening out there. Physical abuse is any kind of bodily injury or pain. And typically, when somebody has been physically abused, they often deny what we're seeing. For example, if we see injuries or bruises, I'm always the first one to ask that the bruise looks terrible. Tell me how that happened. And if it was done due to an accident, they're typically ready to share, yeah, I fell, or I ran into the door, or whatever the case may be. Most typically, though, if it has been done by a perpetrator, being a family member, children, intimate partner, they'll often deny that it was that they're fine. They don't want to talk about it, and you find them just covering up the injury and not wanting to dwell any further into the discussion. For domestic violence, which is also used to gain power control, there's usually 2 types that are going on in this scenario. One is where a spouse, a couple may have had control issues early on, and there may have been some abuse going on, but as they age, the abuse can get worse. Late onset typically happens with people who are fighting with dementia, Alzheimer's. We see a lot of personality changes with people who are going into the later stages of dementia. And sometimes the people that were the nicest, kindest have just turned into be opposite personalities. Top that with the fact that if someone is struggling with Alzheimer's and having memory issues, to wake up in the middle of the night with somebody and look over there and not even recognize who's in bed with you, they might break out into some kind of a rage to protect themselves from this stranger. Perpetrators can be spouses, partners. I think the question to ask on that is anyone threaten to hurt or abuse you? Sexual abuse is exactly what we all know as for any age group. And what we're seeing for perpetrators in this can be caregivers, family members, facility residents, although I believe that facilities are doing a great job of doing what they can to monitor these situations. But they also finding the facilities is not necessarily the caregivers, but the residents within the facilities. So indicators are the normal indicators you see in any kind of sexual abuse. And here's a question to ask. Now, what I encourage you to do is look at these questions to ask and formulate them in a way that you're comfortable in asking that question. These are just some examples of how you could approach the situation. Because later on, I'm going to share with you what you do with that information. Going back to neglect, caregiver neglect is very common. I think we've all heard about the fact that as a caregiver, you need to take care of yourself even more so. And it's difficult when you have another person relying on you 100% of the time. And then we see caregiver burnout, which leads to some kind of abuse, where they're not giving prescriptions, they're not preparing meals, they're not worried about the meals. That can be very, very dangerous. Self-neglect, we're seeing more of that than caregiver neglect. Self-neglect happens when an individual, again, isolates, has removed themselves from family members. This is where hoarding usually steps in. Individuals that are collecting things and can't let go, typically because of a major loss in their life. They start the hoarding process. And it's very difficult for them to let go of these items. And it also presents a health hazard for them and a safety hazard when they're in their own homes. Moving on to psychological verbal abuse. This can be any kind of emotional anguish, threat, produced by anybody. I received a phone call one evening from one of our clients who said that her daughter was being verbally abusive to her and she was afraid of her, and her daughter was her primary caregiver. And I asked where the daughter was, and the daughter had locked herself up in a bedroom, recognizing that she couldn't trust what she might do. And how it came about is they were grocery shopping, and the mother was taking her time shopping. It was her major outing for the week. And the daughter began screaming at her in the store and told her to hurry up. And fortunately, somebody else in the store, another patron, told her that was not appropriate behavior towards her mother or towards anybody. And so we talked to the daughter about respite options and just looking for ways that she could get a break. The mother was, I don't think she was not any physical harm at all. It was just a psychological, which could lead to physical harm without getting answers. Financial exploitation is the big one for seniors, and it's the one that is probably the most difficult to address and also to help curtail before all of their finances have been drained. The difficult part for a senior is they worked hard all their life, and it's not easy to recuperate any financial losses they may be experienced when somebody is financially exploiting them, which could be, and most commonly is, family members, scammers, lawyers, guardians, powers of attorney. And it's a very shameful experience that they go through when they are losing money to someone that they trust. Financial exploitation can come in many shapes and forms. Theft of identity is one, or property. Received another phone call from somebody who asked, if a daughter is going into her mother's house and taking items without the mother's permission, is that financial exploitation? And I said, absolutely yes. If you go into anybody's property and remove items without their approval, it is theft. Coercion, extortion, fraud, deception, usually comes in the form of scams, and I'll be talking about them a little bit later on. The scammers tend to really prey on the elderly because they make the phone calls. The elderly are at home alone, looking for somebody to talk to. They befriend them at the beginning, and then if they aren't coming through with the demands, they quickly turn on them and resort to fear and intimidation. We're also seeing a rise in use of power of attorneys and guardianships. to financially exploit people, keeping in mind that power of attorney can only be invoked at the time when an individual is declared to lack capacity to make their own decisions. Same with a guardianship. The difference is a guardianship has to be through a court order, and a power of attorney can simply be signed by someone who is as a secondary signature on the account. But again, it doesn't give them the right to take anything unless they lack capacity. And the manipulation of finances comes in a lot of different ways, shapes, and forms. A story about a local gal who worked at a bank and talked to grandparents into giving her access to their bank accounts so she could so-called review their accounts daily. Well, she ended up transferring over $150,000 into her own account, and pretty much the grandparents took a total loss on their life savings and didn't want to prosecute, but because it was online transaction, it went to the federal courts, and she ended up spending some time in jail. So here's a kind of what we're seeing as far as scams is the government grant, the grandparent scam. That's when they call and say, hey, Grandma, it's me. I'm in jail. Can you come and get me? And they say, well, Susie, is that you? It's very popular, and it's unfortunately working well in our state because of the rural nature. The IRS scam is also scaring people. That usually happens right around tax time. We had one of our payee clients come in and said, I just want you to know in case I'm not home tomorrow, it's because I'm in jail. I've been told that I owe the IRS money. And so it took some time to talk him or convince him that he did not owe them, and it was just a scam. The fake checks are really popular in the banks where the sweepstake offers are mailing these checks in the mail. And our seniors, especially over the age of 70, are raised in a time where you could trust the mail, that every piece of mail that came in was legitimate mail. And so they still do take the time to read and trust and believe. And I've seen some of these fake checks, and it's hard to notice the difference. I'm getting checks here all the time for $2 million. My staff says I should sign them, but I don't think that's a smart thing to do. Lowering your interest rate's always a hot topic. The sweetheart scam is the one where they're taking advantage of especially elderly men that are lonely, and even at the most difficult time for them, they'll be in a grocery store shopping, they'll approach them and buddy up with them and present a really sad story about, I don't have any money, can I borrow your credit card, I need to get prescriptions, and they just keep bringing them in to the point where they're buying them cars and spending all their money, and this really causes a lot of shame for the individual. It's difficult to go back to your family and tell them, boy, I've just lost $500,000 to a sweetheart scam. But fortunately, a few years back here in Billings, a person that was doing a very good job of this, we had one gentleman finally came forward, pressed charges, and of course several others came up as a result of it. So she hopefully too is serving some time in jail. Lottery sweepstakes scams, and of course the famous Microsoft computer scam. In all, they're trying to just get access to your name, address, bank account numbers, Social Security numbers. The bottom line is they're trying to get access to the account. Now you'll see this website at the bottom, and it's one of the things I encourage you to do is go out to this website for the Department of Justice, Montana.gov, for the Office of Consumer Protection. I'm going to show you a few more slides on this, but you can sign up to receive their emails on the latest scam that's happening right now, and also to help report if somebody's been a victim of a scam. I thought this was very telling about what really happens when somebody's been scammed, just the shame. But when you do report, as it says, it's important to give as much information as possible to stop this. So all this abuse going on, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, this is a wheel that indicates how at the middle of all of this abuse is that the person is trying to get the perpetrator's goal is to gain power and control over the individual. In most cases, polyvictimization is happening at the same time, because if they're emotionally abused them, there may be psychological abuse, there could be typically financial exploitation is at the root of most of these cases. So this really just indicates different methods to gain that power and control over the individuals. So what do we do? Let's go into the reporting process. Of course, there's 3 primary reporting agents. You've got law enforcement, and that would include your local police, your sheriff. You've got the ombudsman, which is tied to anybody that is in a nursing home facility. They're covered through the ombudsman program. And then we have adult protective services. And I think in all 3 cases, it's highly important to cooperate, give them as much information as you can. Names, dates, and times is very, very important. And telling what you saw or heard. Because without that information, they're not going to be able to continue with their investigation. So who is Adult Protective Services? It is a state authorized budgeted program through the Department of Health and Human Services. And I want to just point out here that the abuse does not have to be confirmed, but you want to make sure you have enough evidence so they can go out and visit with the person. And all reports are confidential, and the reporter will never be disclosed to the victim. I think it's really good for people to know, gives peace of mind knowing that they will never disclose. And that's always the first question they ask. So this is a website where you can go for Adult Protective Services. If you click on that map up there, it'll give you a location server so you know which Adult Protective Services to call in your particular area. You can also see here in the middle of the page there's an online reporting form that you can use to report any abuse, neglect, or exploitation. So what happens when you make a referral? Well, they're going to conduct the investigation. They're going to encourage the victim to share as much information as you can. And sometimes that's the most difficult process, because the victim may not want to share what's going on in their life. If needed, they can conduct cognitive assessments. If it involves financial exploitation, they'll want to get releases of information and compile enough evidence and then refer to law enforcement. So again, we always say if it's an emergency, it's always 911, and then to call local law enforcement, either way, for Adult Protective Services, Ombudsman. And for the scams, the Montana Department of Justice Office of Consumer Protection. And this is a picture, this is a photo of their website that you can file a complaint, report a scam, and get scam alerts. And I, again, encourage everyone to sign up for this service. It's sign up to this website. You can see the link right down below there. So I want to end on the 10 tips for everyone to protect themselves. Is, never give out your personal information from the phone or internet. And one of the things we have to do is give permission to people who may fail, to the elderly especially, to say, if you get caught up in a conversation and you think it's legitimate and you give out your bank account number to somebody, let me know right away and we can call the financial institution. I will help you take care of it. We don't want to shame them to the fact that if you ever do it, you know better than that type of thing. Never wire money or give money to someone you don't know. It sounds too good to be true, it is. And get a security freeze on your account. Now, when you go out to that website again, you can click on that link. In my opinion, there are not many cases when somebody over the age of 80 needs to have their security at breach through any one of those credit firms. Use common sense. Again, talk to others. Call if you have any questions. Be skeptical. Ignore the postcard advertisements. And register with the Do Not Call registry. My phone was ringing off the hook the other night, and I have caller ID, and I don't pick up the phone. And I had registered for this Do Not Call registry, but the fact is, if it's a robocall and they're randomly dialing numbers, they're still going to continue to call. So I always encourage, seniors especially, get caller ID and do not pick up that phone unless you know who's calling you. And important phone calls will always leave a message. Of course, keep an eye on your bank and credit card statements. If you are working with an elderly parent or an elderly person, encourage them to get somebody they trust on as an additional signer on their account, that they can check the bank accounts on a daily basis, make sure there are no mysterious transactions coming through, and of course, shred all of the documents. I'd like to end with this slide that I think really describes 3 golden rules that I try to follow. Do the right thing, do the best you can, and always show people that you care. With that, I'd be happy to take questions, and I appreciate this opportunity to visit with you today. If you go to our website, the bottom of our website, you can find us, you can friend us at Facebook, because we do share all of the scam alerts that come out that we're made aware of. Okay, Kayla?
Thank you, Denise. That's great information. And we definitely encourage you to check out the website and their Facebook page and share that with friends and family members, because I think that it would be very beneficial, especially regarding the scam alerts there. So we have an opportunity for questions at this moment. I'm going to go ahead and unmute everyone's line. And if you have any questions, then you are able to do so by, or ask them by just speaking into the phone or your computer audio. If you do not want to be unmuted, feel free to press the mute button next to your icon on the WebEx panel, or you are able to just mute your telephone line yourself. So just one moment as I unmute everyone. If there are any questions, everyone is currently unmuted. Feel free to ask Denise while we have some time.
Hi, Denise. This is Rosemary Hughes from the University of Montana, and I wondered if you could talk to us just a little bit about mandatory reporting.
Yeah, good question on mandatory reporting. So anybody involved in the healthcare industry are considered mandatory reporters. And what that means is reporting to Adult Protective Services anytime you do suspect any kind of elder abuse. Those that are not healthcare or law enforcement outside of that arena, including financial institutions, are not mandatory reporters in this state. But I will say as far as financial institutions, they are now required by FinCEN to report anything over, if there's a transaction of $10,000 or more, or if they suspect there's elder abuse.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And what are the requirements for crime victim advocates or domestic violence prevention providers?
Yeah, anybody, exactly the same. Anybody in the social fields that deal with the victims or the elder abuse cases are mandatory reporters and are required to report.
No. Thank you.
And I really encourage you in each one of your counties to, if you can, to get to know your local Adult Protective Services representatives. Invite them over, visit with them, and just talk to them about what their expectations are and what helps them in the reporting process.
Thank you.
Excellent. Any other questions out there for Denise?
Really hate that the date. Right.
I had one question come through, several great comments. I have one question that came through asking if the webinar would be available after this session and if it could be shared with others. We will be posting this webinar recording. Hopefully you can see the link there that is on my screen that shows healthinfo.montana.edu website. And so that will be website link where this webinar will be posted, and you also should be receiving follow-up email after this webinar is over that reminds you of that link. And if Denise is willing, hopefully she is fine with people sharing it far and wide.
Absolutely. I encourage it.
Well, perfect. Well, hearing any other questions, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you again, Denise, for your incredible information and insight on elder abuse in Montana. We appreciate your time and sharing this information with folks across the state.
And thank you all. And I do encourage you to continue to stay on top of this issue and spread the word in recognition of World Elder Abuse Awareness Month. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.